The wedding was perfect, the kind people dream of. A judge, respected, admired, stood side by side with a man of faith, a pastor whose words had guided an entire congregation. They had vowed to love each other through sickness and health, for richer or poorer, and for 24 hours that promise remained intact. 24 hours. The guests had gone home. The champagne glasses still sat half empty on the kitchen counter. The smell of wedding flowers lingered in the air. Their home, meant to be the start of a new life together, should have been filled with warmth, with laughter. But as the sun set on their first night as husband and wife, something else settled in. Something that didn't belong. Something that festered in the quiet corners of their home, waiting. By the next morning, Judge Isabella Cruz was dead, the husband she had just promised forever to, the man everyone believed was devoted to his faith. He would soon be in handcuffs, accused of a crime so disturbing that even law enforcement struggled to comprehend it. The reason behind it? A reason so bizarre, so senseless, that it defied all logic. A reason tied to something small, something living, something that had been in that house all along. A cat, a smell, and a man who claimed he just couldn't take it anymore. They were supposed to have forever. The vows had been spoken, the rings exchanged. In front of family, friends, and God himself, they promised to stand by each other's side. A judge and a pastor, two people who dedicated their lives to justice, faith, and truth. The kind of couple people looked up to. The kind of love story that seemed unshakable. For 24 hours, their world remained untouched. The wedding dress still hung delicately in the closet, their hands still marked by the weight of fresh gold bands. They had stepped into marriage with all the certainty in the world, but certainty is fragile, and inside their home, beneath the surface of new beginnings, something else stirred. By morning, Judge Isabella Cruz was gone, lifeless. The promise of forever shattered in a way no one could have predicted, and the man who had stood beside her at the altar, Alejandro Herrera, a man who had preached forgiveness, love, and devotion, now stood accused of taking her life. His explanation? It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't rage, it wasn't even premeditated. According to him, it was something much smaller. Something that had existed in their home before he ever stepped inside. A Peter, a smell, and a claim that would leave investigators, jurors, and an entire nation struggling to understand. But before we continue this unsettling journey, I want to hear your thoughts. Was this truly the reason for the tragedy, or was there something else at play? Let me know in the comments below. And if you don't want to miss out on more chilling true crime stories, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on every new video. Judge Isabella Cruz was not just a fixture in the courtroom, she was a force. Those who worked alongside her spoke of her unwavering commitment to justice, her ability to stay calm under pressure, and the way she made even the most difficult decisions with grace. To the public, she was the embodiment of integrity, a woman whose sense of right and wrong never wavered. But her world, her perfect, controlled world, was about to unravel in a way no one could have anticipated. Isabella had recently found love again, and this time it was with Pastor Alejandro Herrera, a man whose own commitment to faith had earned him respect in his community. As the pastor of a growing congregation, Alejandro's sermons inspired many, and his devotion to his beliefs seemed unwavering. On the surface, the two were the ideal couple, a blend of law and faith, of structure and devotion. Together, they created a life that appeared built on trust and mutual respect. Their wedding day was a celebration, a new chapter in both of their lives. Family and friends gathered, smiling as the two exchanged vows, promising to be there for each other, through thick and thin. The images were everything one could hope for in a fairy tale union. But just beneath those smiles, just behind those vows, lay a tension neither could escape. For Isabella, the courtroom was where she found her true purpose. She was fierce, respected by her peers, loved by those who came to her seeking justice. Alejandro, on the other hand, had built a life in front of his congregation, using his words to guide and inspire. Yet those who knew him closely remarked that his faith often appeared fragile, as if held together by the thinnest of threads. Though they both seemed like pillars of their respective worlds, what the public didn't know was that their marriage was already beginning to show cracks. Alejandro had come into Isabella's life with a quiet intensity. His past was a mystery to many. And though he was seen as a man of God, there were those who whispered that his calm demeanor concealed a much darker side, a side that Isabella would soon come to understand all too well. The wedding had been perfect, at least that's how the guests described it. Beautiful and intimate, they said, a celebration of love, of two lives finally coming together. Friends laughed, glasses clinked, and for a brief moment it seemed as though Judge Isabella Cruz and Pastor Alejandro Herrera had found the kind of happiness that lasts a lifetime. But time has a way of revealing the truth, and in this case the truth surfaced much faster than anyone could have imagined. As the last guest left and the front door clicked shut, something shifted. The warmth of celebration faded, replaced by something colder. Neighbors who had seen the newlyweds earlier that evening described Alejandro as quiet, not the joyful, glowing groom they expected. No, they said he seemed tense, distracted, like a man carrying something heavy on his shoulders. Then, late that night, it happened, the first sign that something was terribly wrong. A sharp break in the fragile peace of their new marriage. A witness, someone who lived just next door, would later tell investigators they heard raised voices. An argument. Not the kind of disagreement most newlyweds have, not about money or the stress of wedding planning. This was something else entirely, something unexpected. Isabella's cat, a pet she had owned for years, a companion she adored, but to Alejandro, it was something else entirely, an intrusion, a problem. Then came the words that sent a chill through the darkness of that house, words that would later become a horrifying piece of evidence in the case against him. I heard him yell, "I can't live with that stench." At some point during the night, the argument stopped. The shouting ended. The house fell silent once more. But that silence was not peace. It was something else. A pause before the unthinkable. 911, what's your emergency? My wife. She's not breathing. Morning came, but Isabella Cruz did not wake up. The house, which had been filled with laughter and celebration just hours earlier, was now a crime scene. Isabella's body lay unresponsive in the bedroom. The official cause of death? Blunt force trauma. But that alone didn't tell the full story. The injuries she suffered, the bruises, the fractured skull, the defensive wounds on her hands, painted a picture of something far more violent, something far more personal. The first responders who arrived on scene were met with an eerie silence. There was no sign of a break-in, no forced entry, no signs of an intruder. Nothing was stolen. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was something much closer to home. And then there was the cat. The animal is at the center of the couple's final argument. Nowhere to be found. The bed where Isabella had been discovered showed signs of a struggle. Sheets ripped, bloodstains trailing across the fabric. One thing was clear. Whatever had happened inside that room, it was violent, it was prolonged, and it was not an accident. When officers questioned Alejandro, his explanation was simple, almost too simple. He said she fell, that she slipped and hit her head. By the time he found her, it was too late. But forensic evidence told a very different story. The pattern of injuries, the blood spatter, the force required to inflict such wounds, it all pointed to one thing. This was no fall. This was no accident. The investigators knew, the forensic team knew, and soon the entire nation would know. Alejandro Herrera had more to explain than just a missing cat. Inside the cold walls of the interrogation room, Alejandro Herrera sat motionless. At first, he refused to speak, his hands clasped together, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. The weight of the murder charges pressed down on him, but still, he remained silent. Then, slowly, the cracks began to show. At first, he denied everything. He repeated the same story. She slipped. She hit her head. I tried to help, but it was too late. But the evidence, the blood spatter, the defensive wounds, made his story impossible to believe. The pressure was mounting. And then, he broke. His voice trembled as he muttered the words investigators would never forget. "It was the smell. I couldn't take it anymore." He repeated it again and again, his voice rising, his body shaking. But could a pet cat truly drive a man to murder? Could a simple, everyday irritation, a smell, be enough to push a person to such extremes? Investigators weren't convinced, and as they dug deeper, the story took an even darker turn. Alejandro's past wasn't as spotless as he claimed. Hidden beneath the image of a devoted pastor was something far more troubling. A pattern, a history of control, of rage, of emotional outbursts that those closest to him had tried to ignore. And now, with Isabella gone, those warnings from the past were finally being heard. For years there had been signs, a former girlfriend who left abruptly, refusing to speak of him ever again, a former congregation member who recalled his sudden frightening temper, small red flags, ignored until now. And with those revelations, the investigators' mission became clear. Alejandro Herrera wasn't just a grieving husband, he was a man with secrets. And Isabella Cruz may not have been his first victim. The trial of Alejandro Herrera captivated the nation, a pastor accused of murdering his newlywed wife over a cat. The prosecution painted a chilling picture. This was no accident, no momentary lapse in judgment. This was premeditated, a crime of control, a deliberate act of violence against the woman who had vowed to spend her life with him. But Alejandro's defense team had a different story to tell. They argued that he wasn't a cold-blooded killer, but a man pushed past his limits, a man who suffered a temporary psychotic episode, triggered by something as simple as a smell. The cat's odor, they claimed, had sent him into an uncontrollable rage. But could a jury really believe that? As the trial progressed, emotions ran high. Isabella's family sat in the front row, their faces etched with grief. Some days they sobbed silently. Other days they watched Alejandro with cold, unblinking stares, waiting, hoping for justice. After weeks of testimony, forensic evidence, and psychological evaluations, it all came down to one final moment. The jury had deliberated for just over 6 hours, and then they returned to the courtroom. The room fell silent. The judge asked the foreperson to stand. The verdict was read aloud. And then Alejandro Herrera was convicted of second-degree murder, sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. Justice, it seemed, had been served, but for Isabella Cruz's family, no prison sentence could ever bring her back, and the question still lingered in the air. Was this truly about a cat, or had something far more disturbing been lurking beneath the surface all along? Was justice truly served, or was Alejandro Herrera a man pushed to the brink, a victim of an uncontrollable mental break? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was this a crime of passion, or was there something far more disturbing at play? And if you want more jaw-dropping true crime stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. New mysteries, shocking cases, and unbelievable twists every single week. Isabella Cruz dedicated her life to the law. She fought for justice. She upheld the order. But in the end, she became another tragic case file. The very system she served ensured her murderer was held accountable. But still, one question remains. Was this really about a cat? Or was this a ticking time bomb waiting to explode?